Hello vloggers, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the lesson I gave in my class about a week ago. As you may or may not have known, last Thursday, December 10th, was the anniversary of the United Nations adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was in 1948 in Paris. And last Thursday marked the 67th anniversary of that. So, we started off in my class talking about why anyone would bother to come together to write such a thing. So, of course, my kids were like, well, I asked them what happened right before 1948. So they were like, well, the Holocaust and, World War II and prisoner of war camps and Japanese internment camps. And, World War I was no picnic. And so, of course, we talked about that. And then we read this wonderful article about how lots of different countries in the United Nations, most of them voted to adopt, but there were some that did not. For example, the Soviet bloc did not, they abstained from voting, as well as South Africa and Saudi Arabia. And we talked a little bit about why that would have been. So, of course, the Soviet bloc violated some basic human rights. One of the human rights that that the Declaration afforded was humans have the right to leave their country. Of course, South Africa had apartheid at the time, and Saudi Arabia had a lot of religious issues with that. And of course, I made it very, very clear that Saudi Arabia was not the only Muslim country in the United Nations. There were plenty of other Muslim countries that voted to adopt, and such as Pakistan and Turkey, and they condemned Saudi Arabia's actions. So, and then I asked them what characteristics define a human being. So, of course, they gave me things like, intelligence and empathy, and we talked a little bit about culture and language and speech itself. So, like, freedoms of speech, being able to speak your mind, or communication, things like that. And then I asked them, so what sort of things do you need to protect? What sort of institutions do you need to protect those things? So, of course, they said, like education and, like, love, family, culture. You need people, and you need freedoms, laws and things to protect your freedom of speech. Then we watched this really cool video that had a lot to do, that came from the Human campaign. And this has been going around the internet for a while. But we watched this particular one about Francine Christophe, who is a Holocaust survivor. And so she tells this wonderful story. It's very interesting to hear about how her mother showed just the smallest little bit of compassion to another woman who had also been interred in the concentration camps that they were in, by giving the woman who was pregnant a piece of chocolate to kind of help her through whatever she was going through at the time. And then years and years and years later, Francine was giving a lecture at a conference on, the theme of what if Holocaust survivors had psychologists back in that time. And a woman stood up and handed her a piece of chocolate and said, I'm the baby, which was really cool. So then, I asked them the question again. I asked them what characteristics define a human being, and they told me things like compassion and memories and experiences and hope and love. And we talked about how these are, your rights. These are also your rights. You have a right to compassion, you have a right to love, and you have a right to hope, and you have a right to experiences and memories. And then, of course, we talked about how these are not just your rights, these are everyone's rights. And you as a human being with these rights and abilities have a duty to make sure that everyone else is afforded these rights. Okay, so then we talk, of course, kind of tied it into what we have been doing, what has been going on in the news lately. So, I mean, all of the hate mongering, and then the bombings, and then, of course, the devastating war in Syria, and how all of this is just like what kind of happened before. And, are we following this Declaration of Human Rights like we're supposed to be? So we had just one of the most meaningful discussions I've ever had in my class. It's one of the most meaningful lessons that I've ever taught. And it's the most some of my kids have talked all semester, which is great. So I will see you tomorrow, because I am almost a week late with my video. See you tomorrow.